Thanks very much, Gerald, and good morning, everyone. And just like to welcome everyone to the agency. It's good to see so many people here. We've been working on organising this workshop for a while, so it's great to finally see the fruits now with all of you sitting in the room to discuss this topic. I guess we came to this at the end of 2011. When we discovered really that we were trying to assess and deal with a number of cases of shortages, which all had a common cause, which was that they were due to manufacturing and quality problems. And it was becoming quite difficult for us as regulators to assess and deal with these issues. They're multifactorial issues, and it was really putting a strain on the network, I think, in coming to grips with the numbers that we had to deal with, in fact. So, and the type of issues we had to deal with. And it wasn't just here within the agency at the CHMP, it was also the national competent authorities through the CMDH, for example, who were also discussing the same kinds of issues. So could I have the next slide? Oh, sorry, I have the mouse. Okay. So our experience so far, unfortunately, we've had all of these kinds of issues where we've had almost permanent cessation of manufacture at particular manufacturing sites due to quality or GMP non-compliance issues. We've had temporary shortages or cessations. In some cases, we've had some planned shortages which have turned into even more severe than was planned for. In all the cases, I think it's fair to say they've all been sudden in that, from our point of view as regulators, we're faced with almost a crisis situation from the outset with very little warning. We've also found that some of them may start as national, so supply may be prohibited or restricted to a particular market, or even a region, a global region. But then, as the problem persists and the shortage goes on, it suddenly becomes a pan-European issue. We've had single drug shortages from a single manufacturer, and we've also had shortages of drugs from more than one pharmaceutical product from one manufacturer. In all cases, these medicines have been intended to treat very serious conditions, and in more than one case, there have been very rare indications. We had this year a shortage of a medicinal product, which in one of the indications only had 11 patients in Europe and approximately 50 worldwide. So very, very rare indications can be affected as well. And of course, that means that there is a real lack of alternatives for patients to be switched. And if this product is no longer available at all, then it's very difficult for the patient when they don't have a medicinal product. So I mentioned that often these shortages start as acute shortages and maybe national, but can develop into very long-lasting and can be global depending on the type of product and manufacturer involved. In all cases, when we're dealing with these particular issues, it requires a complex risk-benefit assessment and usually involves multidisciplinary teams from quality, from inspection, from clinical assessment, pharmaceutical assessment, even non-clinical assessment sometimes, and also pharmacovigilance. And then you also have to involve experts in communication, for example, as well. So it's a very complex message, and assessment needed to deal with these cases. So where we are today, so far in 2013, we've had 17 cases reported to us where there could be a shortage of a medicinal product in at least one member state. And we've been able to prevent 15 of those through regulatory assessment. So in these cases, there's either been no recall of a defective medicine or no prohibition of the release of a medicinal product because the benefit outweighs the risks. Unfortunately, we have had 2 complete cessations this year. We've had 2 medicinal products where they're no longer available on the market because of quality problems. We had a case at the beginning of the year due to particulate contamination, and unfortunately that the root cause has still not been established and the product hasn't returned to the market. And the second case was a more complex case, and that completely ceased in June of this year. We are hopeful that that product will return to the market before the end of the year. But just if you think about, the length of time it takes from once a product is no longer being manufactured, it takes a huge amount of time to get that product back to the market. These are really very long-lasting shocks to the system. They're sudden, and they take a long time to restore supply. So in the reflection paper, we tried to crystallize really what the lessons that we had learned from the cases that we had dealt with. And I think the first one we had identified is, we're always left with a dilemma in relation to the risk-benefit. And it can be very difficult sometimes to arrive at that risk-benefit balance where, the risk of a patient receiving a defective medicine outweighs the risk of actually taking it. So that was the first thing. And I think one of the things we wanted to do was come up with a method or tools that could allow us to better reach that risk-benefit analysis. So that was one of the key points on the reflection paper. We also made a couple of points about the globalization of manufacture and extended supply chains. And I think it's important to say that globalization has very positive impact. It allows manufacturers to leverage greater flexibility in suppliers, for example. However, the disadvantage is, if you are also looking at single sourcing on a global scale, perhaps you're running just-in-time inventories and lean manufacturing. All of these factors together with extended supply chains means that when there is a problem, a very small problem can become very significant very quickly and can have a major impact on supply. What we also said in the reflection paper then was that in our experience from the cases that we dealt with, that the industry's approach had been quite reactive. It had been very good, in fact, reactively, in terms of investigation, root cause investigation, and seeking to get supply restored as quickly as possible. However, it was reactive. I think one of the things the CHMP had noted was, we'd like to see more proactivity from industry in preventing these kind of problems arising in the first place. The other key thing we looked at was the regulatory framework and how that was able to cope with these supply shortages. And I think we identified a couple of areas where we could make improvements to how these shortages are communicated through the network. We also noted as well the importance of international collaboration and cooperation on shortages, because many of these manufacturers and many of your supply chains are operating globally and supplying globally, maybe based on regional differences, but nevertheless supplying the entire globe. There is a need for authorities to cooperate and collaborate on particular cases, and we've had great success, I have to say, where we have been able to collaborate with international partners. For example, in one case, we were able to prioritize supply from that manufacturer based on criticality of the medicinal products in Europe. So I think that's a very helpful approach. So the main aims of the reflection paper then, I think, could have been summarised really as the first thing we wanted to do was develop the agencies and the EU regulatory networks processes that facilitate better benefit risk evaluation and communication. And the second part then was to stimulate improvement in risk management and business continuity planning with the goal of supply chain resilience. So the first part was very much about ourselves and what we could do to improve the way we deal with them. But the second part is really to the industry, really to stimulate improvement if we can. And basically the idea will be to develop supply chain resilience. And by resilience we mean not just undertaking the proactive risk assessments, but also to in some way ensure that when there is a shortage, and because shortages will happen, I think, that it's possible for manufacturers and suppliers to bounce back quickly from those shortages and that supply can be restored in the shortest period of time. Now, my colleague on my left, Andrea Taft, will cover in her presentation in the afternoon the key action plan that we developed to fulfill these aims. And she will go into much more detail on what it was we identified that could fulfill these aims. So really, the conclusion then is that we did crystallize some of our key concerns and lessons that we had learned from cases that we had dealt with in at the end of 2011. The implementation plan sets out the initiatives that we undertook over the last year to do this. I have to say one of the key aspects to it was this workshop. So I think hopefully that will allow us now to engage with the industry and with healthcare professionals and patients and consumer groups to basically set out what our expectations are and how can we meet those expectations, and hopefully, in my opinion, to build more resilient supply chains. And of course, patient safety is our main goal, and we should never lose sight of the fact that we do have to ensure that safe medicines are always delivered on time to the patient. So I think that's the last thing I'd like to say. I'd just like to thank you very much for listening.